All right, good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us as we take a few moments to talk a little bit about an introduction to U.S. government contracting, specifically for companies and organizations located here in Poland. This, of course, those applicable, or much of this is applicable to anyone or any company interested in doing some contracting work with U.S. government, but hopefully we show some information that is particularly useful for foreign companies, and again, for companies here in Poland. So what we'll do is we'll take just approximately 30 to 45 minutes here to go over some introductory information, a little bit about ourselves, a little bit about some of the major projects associated with U.S. government contracting here in Central Europe, and then take some time for questions and answers. You can see on the screen there, we have in the chat, we have opportunity for any questions that you might like to ask as we move on. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into this. Starting off with just a little bit of information about ourselves. We were established in 2015. Since then, we've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with a wide variety of different customers, to include various departments within the United States government, working with NATO, working with the Polish military and other organizations within the Polish government. We've worked projects in 6 different countries. We've done a lot of training and education, which is kind of the focus of our conversation here today. And we've trained companies here in Poland, both live and remotely. Very proud to have been part of over $15 million in contract awards, be it as either our direct contracts or working with our partners as opportunities capture some of those contracts. Also very proud to have recently developed some of our own software. You'll see some of the tools that are available to assist with government contracting. We're going to go over a couple of those key tools today. But besides the public tools, there are also private tools, private software suites. And very recently, we were very pleased to have worked with a local company, local IT company here in Poland, to develop some software solutions to assist in managing data and information from public contracting sources, particularly for NATO. So that's very pleased to have that come online. As for the type of services we've had a chance to work on, it's very diverse. These government agencies contract a lot of different types of support and services out, so it leads you to get involved in a wide and diverse array of activities, to include construction, aircraft maintenance, translation services, legal services, transportation services, training, education, of course. So hopefully today we'll get a chance to really show that regardless of what type of work you do, regardless of whether you're a service provider, a manufacturer, a prime contractor, subcontractor, there's always going to be an opportunity for you when it comes to U.S. government contracting. So here are our objectives this afternoon. We're going to be talking very briefly about eligibility and restrictions associated with Polish companies participating in U.S. government contracts. We're going to talk about various opportunities associated at a broad strategic level, all the way down to specific projects here in Central Europe and in Poland. We're going to talk very briefly about federal acquisition regulations, which that's the rule book, right? Those are the regulations which we need to follow in order to successfully navigate U.S. government contracts. We're going to talk about the system for award management. That is how we register in order to be able to capture U.S. government contracts. Beta.SAM, which you might know as FedBizOps or FBO. FBO's transition to Beta SAM. That's how we search for opportunities, or that's the primary tool we use to search for opportunities. And finally, USA spending, where we can get a lot of great information on past awards, who's participating, where contracts are being awarded, and so on and so forth. If you have any questions, again, feel free to type them into the chat box. We'll cover them at the end. And just be aware there's about a 20-second delay between my presentation and everything popping up to you there. So I will get to those as I see them. Okay, so starting with eligibility and restrictions. As a Polish company, as a foreign company, are you able to win a US government contract? And the short answer to that question is yes, you are. There are a variety of bilateral agreements of legal foundations for a Polish company to be awarded a US government contract, either as a prime contractor, so the direct contract holder with the US government, or as a subcontractor and as a supplier. And I really want to emphasize that everything we talk about today is not only applicable to those companies interested in being a prime contractor. You very well might be in a situation where you have an item or service that you can offer to many other companies, which would be the prime contractors. And there's a lot that we're going to look at that's just applicable to you as the subcontractor, and these tools which the prime contractors use to find opportunities, you as a subcontractor can also use to connect to your prime contractors. So that's a very important element of this. The foundation, there's more than one, but kind of the core foundation, the core legal foundation for Polish companies to be able to do business with the U.S. government is the World Trade Agreement Government Purchase Agreement, the WTO GPA. Basically, that is an agreement that both the United States and Poland has signed and offers reciprocity in government contracting. So just as here in Poland, it's very common for U.S. companies to come and bid and capture and be awarded Polish government contracts, the opposite is true. A Polish company generally is permissible, or it is permissible for them, and they are welcome to bid on and capture U.S. government contracts. So you can see on the next bullet there, we have 48 CFR, so that's the Code of Federal Regulations. That kind of shows where it's codified in U.S. regulations that yes, there's this list of companies, or sorry, list of countries. These countries that have signed the WTO GPA, again, both the United States and Poland has signed that. So therefore, under U.S. law, under U.S. regulation, that level of reciprocity is provided. So no one should be telling you that a Polish company cannot bid on a U.S. government contract in a general sense, right? In a general sense. Now, there are some restrictions and limitations, as there are here in Poland. It's not uncommon, for example, to see the Ministry of Defense in Poland apply various regulations and laws which restrict access to participation in public tenders. And the same thing from time to time happens in the United States. You may have heard of the Buy American Act. It shouldn't be any surprise that there is a desire to place U.S. companies in favorable positions for capturing U.S. government contracts, as it's U.S. taxpayer money, so they want it to be returned to the U.S. taxpayer. Same thing here in Poland, right? Generally, you're going to want to see Polish taxpayer money returned to Polish companies, but that doesn't exclude all participation of foreign participants. So there are provisions in the Buy American Act where U.S. companies might be favored. This does not necessarily mean that if elements of the Buy American Act apply, that a Polish company cannot participate, for example, as a partner or a subcontractor. We're not going to go into too many of the technical details today because that would be a little bit too much in depth. But within the Buy American Act and various other laws and regulations, there are percentages. There's percentages of content. There are various elements that still may permit foreign content in a particular project if some of those rules and regulations are applied. There's other laws and regulations that might apply specifically for certain industries, for certain items. A common one that is very applicable when we see contracting opportunities out here in Central Europe is the Berry Amendment. This basically provides preference to U.S. manufacturers of textile and other goods. So you might see the application of this law, which restricts or limits foreign manufacturing or non-U.S. manufacturing. We're going to talk a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit about the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA. This ends up being quite important, whether you are an American or foreign registered business. It's very common in the United States to have what are called small business set-asides. So certain U.S. government contracts will state this contract can only be captured by a registered U.S. small business. Now, when I say small business, I mean that it's a very specific item. I don't mean that in a general sense. Here in Europe, you have SMEs, small and medium enterprises. In the United States, you have the Small Business Administration, and there's a very specific and very formal process for a U.S. small business to register with the Small Business Administration and potentially register as a disadvantaged business, which provides further bidding support, which provides further opportunities, set asides for those businesses. So a foreign company, so a Polish registered company, cannot, as a Polish company, register as a small business. But you'll often find it's very important to understand the Small Business Administration process, because you may be able to be a subcontractor, you may be able to be a partner, you may be able to be a provider to some of these SBA set asides. Understanding that as a foreign entity, as a Polish entity, is quite important. It's not a very well understood element outside the United States, but there's many circumstances where you can find this can be very, very beneficial, not only to the SBA, but also to potential potential providers. If you are a Polish entity that has established a U.S. entity, so if you have a entity in the United States, if you have a company in the United States, but it's controlled by Polish capital, or it's controlled by a Polish owner, whether it be a company or an individual, that U.S. registered entity is still eligible to be registered with the Small Business Administration and take advantage of some of that. And that's also is not very well understood or known. There's actually a legal ruling done on this. So if you are a Polish entity, and not only do you find interest in participating in U.S. government contracting, but there's enough of an impetus there that you want to establish a presence in the United States, just because your shareholders, just because your owners, just because the capital is owned by a Polish citizen or by a Polish entity, does not in and of itself exclude you from taking advantage of various elements of the Small Business Administration programs. So keep that in mind, also quite important. Lastly, another common restriction could be, for example, a security clearance, right? There might be a project which requires certain personnel with U.S. security clearances, and of course, that there might be restrictions there if you're not a U.S. entity. So the takeaway here is to illustrate that as a rule of thumb, generally, yes, Polish entities are able to participate in U.S. government contracting. However, there are some restrictions and limitations, and being able to understand those and quickly identify them will help you evaluate potential opportunities and figure out which ones you can go after, which ones are attractive, and which ones you either need to pursue a different approach, for example, via a U.S. Small Business Administration registered company, via a local entity, and which are just simply restricted and not available at this time. All right, so let's take a look at why we would potentially be interested in doing business with the U.S. government, right? We're out here generally, and I'm presuming I'm speaking to mostly people out here in Poland. We've got plenty of work in Central Europe, plenty of work with the Polish government. So why invest time and energy into this? And the answer, well, let's work ourselves backwards here. So on the right side of the screen, you can see two numbers, and these are a little bit dated. But in 2018, via public contracting, so contracts let by the Polish government, you can see that Poland spent almost 10% of its GDP on public contracts. Now, this isn't in the entirety of government spending. These are publicly awarded and competed contracts by the Polish government of about 200 billion zloty. So simple math, take a 4-to-1 exchange rate, and you're talking about $50 billion a year in government contracts from the Polish government. Now, that's a nice number, but if we compare that to the United States, we're almost at $1 trillion. And I again want to emphasize this is not the entirety of the budget of the government. These are just the contracts. These are just the awarded contracts to commercial entities. So you're talking nearly 20 times the size of Polish government contracting with the United States. And keeping in mind what we just covered, that is accessible to you. That is a market that is accessible to you as a Polish company. Now, when we talk about doing business with the U.S. government or the Polish government, it's very abstract. It's a very difficult thing to get our heads around because it is so large. It's a very very large number and somewhat difficult to imagine. So, one perspective I recommend taking on the matter is identifying which organizations are going to be your clients. Which organizations are you most interested in? Do your services or your supplies uh, apply the most value? In the United States, there are 15 different departments. So they have 15 executive branch departments within the United States, and I find this is a very good way to start thinking about this. What we're going to find out here in Poland and Central Europe is largely, overwhelmingly, particularly in the current environment, we're going to talk about this in the next slide, the Department of Defense is going to be probably our biggest client due to the U.S. military presence in Central Europe, but perhaps not too far behind that, the Department of State, as we of course have the local diplomatic mission out here in Poland and some other programs. We're even going to be talking about grant programs, and we'll get to see what the Department of State does with some of the grant programs. And everything we're talking about is applicable for grants just as it is for contracts. All the system that the U.S. government uses to award a contract, a competitive contract, is very similar, almost entirely the same as it is to award a grant. So we're going to talk about that a little bit coming up. So this is just a good way to illustrate the scope and the scale of what is out there and some of the key departments and key areas with whom we might work. Again, this is not to say that we're limited to the Department of Defense or the Department of State. We've certainly seen with the recent COVID crisis that the Department of Health and Human Services, very important. We ourselves had some opportunities to put in potential offers there. We currently actually have an offer in with the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, I believe, if I recall correctly. So just because some of these entities might have most of their operations within the United States, again, does not necessarily mean you are excluded from participating in their public projects. All right, so let's talk a little bit more specifically about what's going on out here in Poland and some of these government contracts, which might really hit home as they are here in Poland or in Central Europe. The big ones, of course, are with the Department of Defense, the European Deterrence Initiative, the Operation Atlantic Resolve, and of course we have the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence. Even though it's a NATO project, but there's still a lot of crossover there. A couple images on the screen. Up here at the top left, we just have some of the key locations of U.S. and NATO forces as taken from their public information. You can kind of see where we have that presence out here. Already in Poland, we've had almost, I believe we perhaps have surpassed $500 million with a B, $500 million in military construction. Be that at the Redzikowo Air and Missile Defense Facility, be that at Powice, at the Powice Air Base, Łask Air Base, Drawsko-Pomorskie, up in Orzysz, and even down in the Zagan, Bolesławiec area, where we have a lot of U.S. forces stationed. On the top right of your screen, you can see the next, we're going to call it a small exercise. What was supposed to be a lot bigger as part of Defender 20, but of course we had the health crisis, so that was drawn down a little bit, but you can see it is still going on. And we are actively tracking opportunities associated with these exercises, be it in logistics, transportation services, fuel services. And we're gonna get to all of that as we move forward. These projects don't come out of nowhere. That's kind of another point that I really want to emphasize, that we don't want to be positioning ourselves to pursue opportunities when the contracts are announced. We actually want to have some visibility far prior to that. And we can do that with the information that's available publicly through U.S. government budgeting processes and other public information. Generally, we can find at least outlines of plans and be prepared for the type of activities which will be pursued each year. Another key point is that the United States fiscal year ends in September and begins on October 1st. So the fiscal year, the financial year, does not match the calendar year. So this is quite impactful for when the U.S. government spends a lot of its money. We all know with government, it's not uncommon to have end of year money try to be spent before the beginning of the next fiscal year. So whereas in Europe you see a lot of that happen in your November, December, and perhaps bleeding over a little bit into the new year, with the United States, this occurs in the late summer and the early fall. So these are the types of things that we want to be prepared for. You can see on the screen here, we have the fiscal year 2021 requested European Deterrence Initiative budget of 4.5 billion with a B dollars. You can see it looks like it's trending down there a little bit, and it started at $3 to $4 billion back in, I believe, 2016, and it worked its way up to around $6.5 billion, but still $4.5 billion requested is quite substantial. And you can see that second line from the bottom there. That's a rather important one. That improved infrastructure. That's a lot of this military construction that we see in the region, and these tend to be publicly announced, publicly competed tenders. All right. In a more general sense, and these are a little bit dated numbers, but it takes some time for these numbers to kind of all consolidate in these systems. Uh, but in a more general sense, what does the government actually spend money on with foreign companies? So that's what we're taking a look at here. So on the left we have, this is only the Department of Defense. I want to emphasize this is in 2016, fiscal year 2016, only one department, only the Department of Defense, and these are only contracts awarded to foreign entities. So these aren't even all the contracts, and foreign entities as primes. There's many more contracts, much larger contracts, in which you often have a high number of foreign subcontractors. So we are just talking about the contracts where a foreign entity is the prime with the Department of Defense in 2016. And you can see that alone exceeds $10 billion. So what are the things that we're buying? And you can see it's a little bit of everything. 30% of the contracts awarded were for services, 22% for petroleum, for fuel, 22% for construction, 8 fell into an other category, so undefined of various other items. 7% for subsistence, so that's your food and water and drink. 3% for aircraft equipment, ships, and electronics, aircraft, and combat vehicles. Now, while these make up relatively small pieces of this pie, a small slice of a $10 billion pie is still $100 million. So we're still talking hundreds of millions of dollars for traditionally defense-related items. So it's a really good example to show that the defense market there is not does not exclude foreign participation. Very similar to what you see here in Poland. It's very common to have a mixture of indigenous equipment along with imported equipment. You of course still have that in the United States as well. Now on the right side of the screen, these are some projects which are active in the region right now. These are projects which Polish company, Polish industry is fully eligible and able to participate. And I believe with all of these, not only are they eligible to participate, these are projects here in the region, here in Central Europe region. So we have, for example, EUCOM and AFRICOM. EUCOM stands for European Command. AFRICOM is African Command. So if you're familiar with how the U.S. military structures itself, that's basically what we call a geographical combatant command. And these are the units which kind of control the force movement and the force buildup and structure within their particular geographic area of responsibility. So there's a recent deployment distribution conference. This, of course, got canceled, but we expect that to come up again. Fuel support for Eastern Europe. A specific project for Poland here. We have market research to determine potential local ship repair services, service providers basically on the Baltic coast for the U.S. Navy, for the Sixth Fleet. C-130 program depot level maintenance for worldwide service. So this is actually will not be for in the United States. These will be at foreign depot service locations because the U.S. Air Force decided, hey, this is too expensive for me to take my aircraft and have to fly them all the way back to the United States to do this maintenance work, especially when we've seen the development of these C-130 maintenance capabilities all over the world over the last 10 to 20 years. So there's a recognition within the U.S. Air Force that it doesn't make sense to continue to ignore these maintenance capabilities that have been developed all over the world. At POVEDS, where we already have hundreds of millions of dollars of military construction that has been awarded, and some of which has already begun. We have a new project coming up, construction of a deployable airbase system. It is actually a deployable airbase system storage facility. So it's not a deployable airbase system, it is the storage for a deployable airbase package. And that's coming up in the near future at POVEDS. And another great example just recently was an industry day for airbase defense for the U.S. Air Forces in Europe. And this included everything from small counter drone systems all the way up to defeating hypersonic vehicles. Again, fully open to foreign participation. And as we get through using the tools, we're going to be able to take a look at these and show you a little bit what it looks like. I am not going to go too detailed into federal acquisition regulations, just because that would be very painful for all of us. But suffice to say, the U.S. government is a very large and very complex contracting entity. And for better or worse, that means the contracting regulations are substantial, to put it politely. That being said, they are manageable, right? These processes and procedures are manageable. And investing a little bit of time in understanding how they work, and probably most importantly, which unique FAR federal acquisition regulations elements apply to you as a Polish company, right? A lot of these are going to apply broadly. Many of these are not going to apply at all because they're designed for larger companies or they're designed for specific activities. But there are specific FAR elements which are more or less applicable to different types of companies, and the ones we would want to take a look at in more depth, or the ones we recommend taking a look at more depth, are those which apply to foreign companies. Down here on the right, this is just a kind of example of having to try to figure out which FAR regulations may apply or may not apply. It's kind of just as a joke there, but it's a challenge, and it is something that we want to do as we try to figure out which projects to participate in. We also have something called the DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. So the DoD has a supplementary group of rules which attach kind of onto the FAR. And so if you're going to be doing work with the Department of Defense, then that's something important to know. Probably the biggest change or the most impactful change that's come up recently are new requirements for IT security, for cybersecurity. So we're seeing increased requirements by the U.S. government for contractors and subcontractors to meet various IT and cybersecurity requirements. So you need to know what those are so that you can meet the obligations of the contract. Another point I want to make when it comes to the FAR is many FAR clauses, not all, but many of them are what we call flow down, which means even if you're a subcontractor, elements of the FAR may and often will apply to you. So this becomes very relevant, for example, in something like a foreign military sales case. In a foreign military sales program, you have the United States government purchasing military equipment on behalf of Poland, on behalf of a foreign entity. So whereas the equipment provider might be a large U.S. company, if there are local subcontractors, if there are offsets, if there are elements of delivery of that project which are done by foreign companies, even if they are not the prime contract holder, some of the FAR regulations might, and again we use the word flow down, and impact those subcontractors. So you can make yourself more attractive as a subcontractor. You can make yourself more attractive as an offset entity by being able to work with your U.S. partners and illustrate that you understand your requirements and how to fulfill the requirements of the FAR and of the DFARS. And that is kind of where we'll leave that one. All right, so what we're going to do now is get away from the slides a little bit and do a very, very quick illustration of some of the key tools for U.S. government contracting. So we are going to start with SAM, the System for Award Management. And we're going to go ahead and pull this up here. All right, so this is SAM. This is the website that we will go to in order to register with the U.S. government to do business. I'm not going to go through a full company registration here. That would take a little bit too long. But there are some other kind of cool things that you can do on here beyond just beyond just logging in and registering your company. You can actually search for information. So this is a fantastic tool. It's a great way to see who is kind of operating in this space in your country or anywhere else. If you want to look up any company that's registered to do business with the U.S. government, you can do it here. And there's a great advanced tool that we can use. So I can go to advanced search by entity. I can search by location. I can search by country. We can go down to Poland here. I can run the search. And you can see that there are 328 entities registered to do business with the US government here in Poland. Now, if we export these results, we can actually get some detailed information on each of those entities. So just like that, you can have a list of every single company registered to do business with the US government by various filters. Now, one thing you might notice on here is not everything that you see on the screen is necessarily a company. Some of them are NGOs, some of them are educational institutions, and that is related to what we talked about earlier. In order to receive a grant from the US government, you use the same system, these same processes that we've been discussing, registration in SAM, various regulations apply for grants as well. So in Poland, and we just happened to check one day ourselves, actually, even though you can see that there are 328 entities registered to do business with the US government, approximately 40% of these are NGOs or universities or various other government, Polish government institutions. Who may be working on various grant programs, various shared funding type programs. So out of those 328, almost half of them, in terms of companies actually bidding on contracts, it's just over half. So you're really only talking 170, 180 companies registered in the Republic of Poland to do business with the U.S. government. I can tell you, and we don't have really time to go through it all, but if we were to compare that to other countries, it's quite low. Ukraine, for example, has almost 1,000. So that's something we've spent a lot of time working on here in Poland. Back when we started in 2015, I think the first number I recall seeing on here was 220 something, 222. So over 5 years, we've seen this grow by about 100, which is good, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially given the amount of U.S. government work in the region. With all this construction, over $500 million in military construction, major exercises, and other projects. And again, this is to include everything that's going on in the United States and other locations. I definitely think there's still some room for improvement there. So moving on to the next item we're going to take a quick look at is BetaSAM. Not to be confused with SAM. I believe someday these are all supposed to be combined, but for now, BetaSAM is what used to be known as FBO, Fed Biz Ops. It's basically, whereas SAM was your portal for registering a company and also doing a little bit of searching on company information. BetaSAM is where we really go to search for opportunities. So we will take a quick look at that. So this is what BetaSAM looks like. And again, we'll go through here super quickly and just do a very simple example. But in BetaSAM, this is one of the tools, or this is kind of your primary tool to go out and see where the opportunities exist. So one of the simplest things that we can do is we can go to contract opportunities. We can search for keywords such as Poland. We have various filters and ways to navigate the data. I'm going to turn active only off so that I get some of the archive data. And let's go by last updated date. And we can see some of the projects which are active or were just recently active, or Many of these will be active. Some of these are pre-solicitations. A lot of the information on here um, hasn't necessarily gone out to contract yet. These are, again, just pre-notifications or information on industry days and so on and so forth. So you can see we have some projects for installation of anti-terrorism and force protection facilities in Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland. We have, of course, the POVIDS project, which we had discussed. We even have a solicitation for some textile goods, for some boots. In this particular one, this one pops up because the keyword Poland is in there regarding eligible nations, going back to what we discussed earlier, whether or not a company from a country is eligible to participate in a particular program. There's another really interesting one here. Military working dogs in Netherlands, Germany, Poland, and Hungary. Large MATOC, which is a large, basically, umowa ramowa, a type of framework contract for construction, and a whole host of other items. Again, we could spend a lot of time going through all this. And this is just Poland. We could look at other locations and other information. But as you dig into each of one of these, so let's go ahead and pull up on one of these. You can find more detailed information. Find information on the contracting officer. Find information on what the project might look like. Sometimes you might find information on bidders conferences and attendees. It kind of goes back to that idea of this can be very, very useful data for subcontractors as well. You might not be interested in being a prime contractor for this project, for example, but if you want to find out who is interested and perhaps the types of services they might be looking for, and even contact information, because it's very common for the government to post participant lists, then these are fantastic resources and fantastic tools. Going back to industry days and other networking opportunities, it's sort of hidden here. I don't really like how they did this, but if you go to this little drop down arrow, you'll actually find small business events, which we discussed, the importance of the small business program, and vendor collaboration opportunities that will pop up on there. So these are just, again, fantastic market research, fantastic networking, fantastic information. And I see we have a question here on how to do a demo. How could we potentially find companies that are looking for primes? And so let's do that. Let's see if we can answer that question, because it just so happens we have an excellent example of that on here. So as I mentioned, it's not uncommon. Let's see if I can't find where can I go back to my MATOC. Here we are. So it's not uncommon for some of these larger projects to host industry days. And for this particular project, so this was the $250 million MATOC for Poland, it just so happens that there was an industry day. And as part of this industry day, there was a lot of information posted. There's, of course, the on-site event. But you can see here, look at this. We have the registrant list. So let's take a look at that. And basically my theory on this is run by the US government. So I'm not sure how the European Union feels about data privacy and so on and so forth with all this. And my excuse is I'm taking this off a US server. So it's if you showed up, then you know what you're signing up for. So you can see here in this particular project, what the U.S. government has done is provided an opportunity for companies to attend and also indicate what to do and what they potentially might be looking for. So this could be this could be something that's sponsored by the U.S. government, sponsored by the government to do. They provide an opportunity for prime contractors and for potential subcontractors to integrate and to network. Again, going back to the vendor collaboration services and small business events, that's another fantastic way, right? Participating in these projects is a fantastic way to network with potential primes and other potential suppliers. There's another item that you can't see unless you log in. So You know what? Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and log in here just to illustrate the point. And when you log in, it does ask for your two-factor authentication. So don't worry if you see me typing in my little password on the screen here. It's just a one-time use. But that is something you want to be aware of when you register into these systems.
According to Wikipedia, a system is a group of interacting
And
entities.
hey, look at that! Somehow I got Siri to provide some information for me. That was fun. All right. So if we go back, now we're logged in. And as we're logged in, we're actually going to have access to a little bit more information. So if I go back to Poland, and let's just kind of pick a kind of a random project here. Let's go back to our deployable airbase system. You can see here over on the left now there is a button here that did not appear before. And that is the interested vendors list. So when you're logged in, you'll actually be able to sign up as an interested vendor. And this is another great way to illustrate that you are potentially interested in this project. Sometimes people use it, sometimes they don't. I can say that I think under the new Beta SAM, everyone's still looking for it. So keep in mind that this just changed recently, and Beta SAM still has some bugs and it's still undergoing some upgrades. So there's a lot of companies still trying to figure this out a little bit. But the interested vendors list would be another good answer to that question. So kind of in summary, you have you have your various industry days, which might be associated with the project. You have vendor collaboration, you have small business events, and then you have your interested vendors list. Additionally, then you can also look at when you go to award data, you can search specifically not for just for existing opportunities, but also for awarded contracts. So you can see who won past contracts. And by identifying who won a past contract, you can then reach out to that company. So very good question. Let's go to our final item, which is USA spending. So USA spending is a good segue coming out of Beta SAM there in terms of looking at past information. USA spending is one of, there's a couple of different websites the US government has available to look up past award information, but USA spending is a great place to start. And again, we can go to our award search, we can go to an advanced search, and we have a lot of different filters where we can search for contract information. So if you have the contract number, if you have the company name, if you have the company DUNS number, you can look by NAICS code. NAICS is your North American Industry Classification Code, which is similar to your Common Procurement Vocabulary or your CPV code out here in Poland or in Europe. And we can do all sorts of fun things with this. Again, we can go, for example, by location, by the place of performance. We can go to Poland. Let's get all down here. And let's just go collect here. Let me take some of these off here so that it doesn't take too long capturing the data. Let's just do the last couple of years. And we add that filter. And again, let's just keep it simple. Let's just let this pull up all awards that were associated with Poland as a place of location. And you can see in the last couple of fiscal years, 707 contracts, 138 grants, so on and so forth. Now, again, these aren't Polish companies per se. These are just projects done in Poland. We can actually change this if we wanted to from the instead of place of performance, we could do recipient location, which is where the company or entity that won the contract is registered, and we can see the Polish entities which have captured contracts. And of course, you're going to see a lot of overlap. So another fantastic tool, another fantastic resource to build the capabilities to be able to effectively participate in these projects. And that is, let's see, that's been about 45 minutes exactly, just give or take. So I think that is probably pretty good in terms of what we wanted to cover. just in general, we wanted to provide some introductory information on kind of those key elements, right? Um, as a Polish company, are you eligible? And the answer generally is yes. There are some restrictions. We want to be aware of those restrictions so that we can pick the projects where we participate effectively. The Federal Acquisition Regulations are a term that you will become intimately familiar with if you'd like to participate in U.S. government contracting. They are, you don't want to be afraid of them, but they are fairly complex and fairly large. So that's somewhere where it's worth investing a little bit of time and energy and understanding which apply to you and based upon your company size, based upon how you're structured, based upon the project you're participating in, based upon the location and a lot of other factors. We took a look at some of the opportunities out here, not only in the region, but more broadly with the U.S. government. You can see there's a very, very large number of contracts awarded. Given the current health and economic crises, which we're kind of in the middle of, you can expect to see a lot of government contracting. It's the I don't think the standard model, I guess, as you will, the Keynesian economics has gone away here, and I think you're going to see a lot of government spending as they try to pull themselves out of these holes. And so understanding how to participate and capture some of these contracts can be a very good way to diversify your business. A lot of people say government contracting is recession proof. I don't know if I'd go that far, but it certainly can blunt some of the impacts as various other commercial opportunities are restricted in a financially constrained environment. And then finally, we took a look at some of those key tools we have available. SAM to register and also collect some information, Beta SAM to find specific opportunities, and USA Spending to see where the money is going. And so with that, I appreciate everyone taking their time to join in, and I will stand by for a couple of moments to field any questions. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat there. This is being recorded, and we will keep this up on our YouTube page so that you can review it anytime that you like to. And if you have any questions, I will throw my email address in the chat here. Feel free to ask me any questions you have. Otherwise, again, thanks for your time. All right, if we don't have any other questions, then I will go ahead and shut this down momentarily here. And again, thanks everybody for tuning in.